Today, we celebrate Black excellence. Our panel is an example of the amazing work and contributions we have all across varying sectors. These individuals have helped shape the narrative within our workplaces and communities and have all helped pave the way in our fight to end anti-Black racism. So thank you all for being here. Our moderator for tonight is Ginelle Skerritt, the CEO of York Region Children's Aid Society, public speaker, moderator, facilitator, and advocate dedicated to principles of inclusion, anti-racism, and social justice. Since 1994, she has led anti-Black racism training with various groups, including police officers, teachers, Canadian Forces personnel, elementary and high school students, and community service workers. Ginelle is a publishing author, Suzu Banker Lady, and champion of collective economic development initiative, and a proponent of policing reform, food sovereignty, basic income, and African indigenous knowledge, and a friend of mine. So thank you, Ginelle, for accepting to facilitate tonight, to moderate. So the first speaker in our panel is Rosemarie Powell, Executive Director of Toronto Community Benefit Network, a passionate advocate for social, economic, and environmental justice with over 20 years of experience building strong partnership with community, labor, government, and industry partners to address systemic barriers and increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in the construction industry. Welcome, Rosemarie. So our second speaker is Gary Pieters, Commissioner of the Ontario Human Rights Commission, principal in Ontario's public education system, and a past president of the Urban Alliance on Race Relations, who brings a systemic lens with high impact, thought and action-oriented leadership to better respond to the increasingly complex human rights landscape of the society in which we live, learn, lead, work, and find leisure. Angela Robertson, Executive Director of Parkdale, Queen West, Community Health Center is dedicated to people and communities facing discrimination, poverty, and marginalization, and works to change these social conditions. Some of her most recent work in response to COVID-19 includes having initiated and co-chaired a Black Health Equity Working Group on health sector experts, leaders, practitioners, and researchers concerned with improving the health and well-being of Black people. Welcome, Angela. And Hugh Reynolds, principal of the Afrocentric Alternative School, unfortunately was not able to make it this evening. However, he has shared his input with our moderator, Ginelle, where she will incorporate his feedback into the discussion. Who is passionate about ensuring that students' lived experience and cultural backgrounds are reflected in the daily operation of the school, and seeks to collaborate with staff and community to motivate students to reach for excellence in everything they do. If you do not have already done, learn more about our panelists and read their full bios on our event page. Sharon Simpson, our Labor Community Service Special Project Coordinator, will be assisting in monitoring the chat. Now I would like to invite Ginelle to begin the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here this evening to talk about this important topic. And I'll get right to asking the panelists the first question. So what is the significance of celebrating Black History Month during this time? And I don't know who wants to go first, so unmute yourself and let's hear from you.
So it's Angela here.
Hi.
Hello there. Good to be in this conversation. So I would likely say that I have a contested relationship with Black History Month, in that I believe it is both a time to affirm our presence and our contribution as Black peoples in these Americas. But I also feel that it is also a time when we need to address and call out and call upon others to address anti-Black racism and to work for the just change that I think we all desire. I think I say contested because I come from the place where the framing of Black history is framing as history, which sometimes suggests that we are only talking about the past. And here I would quote kind of the author, African-American author and scholar, James Baldwin, when he talks about history is not the past, that history is the present, that history is present, that we carry our history with us, and that we are our history. And I believe that all of those things are true for us as Black people in Black History Months, Black History Month. Hence, I think the visibility of our contribution, I think, must be 365. It cannot just be the shortest month in the year. And that I'm also troubled as well that when we call upon Black History Month, is that oftentimes we are framing the work, and we're framing the remembering and the marking as only linked to our history here, as beginning with the history of slavery and our as a stolen people to these American shores, and yet not bringing forward the long history of our indigenous Black histories with us. So really, for me, as I said, you know, the Black History Month is an important month, but I think a contested month, because I think Black History Month also needs to be a moment for white folks to talk about white supremacy, and not just for Black folks to talk about racism. So, you know, those are some of the things that I would frame.
Thank you for sharing that.
That's pretty powerful. And let me go next from a different perspective, but pretty much in line with what Angela had to say. You know, for me, if you think about many of the iconic buildings that you see across the landscape of Toronto and across Canada, you probably wouldn't know that a Black contractor or engineer or iron worker had a role in building it. Just like the new Eaton Center pedestrian bridge or the Skywalk. I hope many of you have seen it. I'm putting in the chat the link to the beautiful picture of it. By the way, built by one of our board of directors, a Black contractor, Stephen Callender, Bass Installation. Y'all might not have known about that. So for me, within the context of our community benefits movement, Black History Month is a time to spotlight the outstanding achievements of our Black brothers and sisters who have or who are paving the way now in an industry that has often excluded them. The fact is, the sweat, blood, and tears of our ancestors went into building infrastructure in this country, and we deserve to be here and to benefit from the economic prosperity that our labor has produced. Yet not too long ago in 2020, in the midst of a pandemic, several nooses were found on different unionized construction sites, putting Black people on notice that they are not welcome on the job site and that their safety is in question. So by negotiating community benefits agreements into major infrastructure projects, TCBN, our collective work together is ensuring that the next generation of builders include more Black people. And when they look back at the Eglinton Crosstown, for example, and the Finch West LRT, or the Casino Woodbine, or the West Park Healthcare Center, on which we now have community benefits, they will be able to say to their children and their children, I built that. And what a sense of pride and ownership that is achieved as a result of that. This is what we need to continue to fight for. That's it.
Excellent, thank you. So you're asking us to recognize what's happening right now, to create the legacy that we're creating of history right now by the workers who are here right now. And Angela is reminding us to think of Black history as an ongoing pursuit for ourselves. Do any of the other panelists wish to comment? So I guess that only leaves Gary. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
So I'm responding to the first question, what is the significance of celebrating Black history during this time.
Yes.
I mean, the significance of celebrating Black history during this time is quite enormous. I mean, there have never been a time in our history where we're dealing with so many challenges. And one of the biggest challenges that we're dealing with is how do we once and for all root out anti-Black racism from all of our institutions. What I said recently, one of the largest public institutions in this city, is I said that basically the pervasiveness and the rampantness of anti-Black racism is a form of oppression that's used for power and control over a large body of people who are protected by the human rights, Ontario Human Rights Code, which is Black people, right? So there's no reason why large organizations should have the pervasive and rampant anti-Black racism that exists in them. So in terms of Black History Month, the significance of it is continuing to drive that message that, you know, when corporations are doing well, to say that this practice is good practice. But in terms of practices that continue to oppress, marginalize, push out, and create poverty for our communities, we need to put those organizations on notice, to call them out and to let them know that this is not okay. In terms of the significance of Black History Month, I just wanted to look back a little bit for about 30 seconds and say that, you know, sitting in a room that's on a panel that is hosted by the Labor and Community Services, I could not continue without looking back at some of the people who have done significant work in creating the society in which we live for everyone of all diversities. You know, Bromley Armstrong and his work with Ruth Lohr and others who who helped to push legislation that provided equal access to services, you know, before the Human Rights Code. You know, June Veacock, you know, Janice Geary, Fred Opshaw, Owen Leach, and quite a number of stalwart unionists who have really not just made life better for their employees, their co-workers, but they made life better for every single Ontarian and every single Canadian in terms of the work that they did in terms of driving change, in terms of societal change, policy change, legislative change. So those are some of the levers that we can use to dismantle anti-Black racism: policy, legislation, systemic change. And in terms of my role, you know, as a commissioner with the Ontario Human Rights Commission, those are some of my key imperatives: is driving policy change in all sectors to ensure that Black people and people who love Black people are able to enjoy the fruits of their labor, to have the freedom to walk into a store without being followed and profiled, to have a job without being pushed out of their jobs, to, you know, to interview and to access those jobs, to be able to be their authentic selves wherever they want to be. I mean, this year is the 26th anniversary of the official recognition of federal recognition of Black History Month, and that was driven by Jean Augustine with support from the Black History Society, with Rosemarie, Dr. Sadler, and other people, individuals in the community. So, I mean, when you look at the work that they've done, it's the work that we must continue. So, one of the things that came to mind for me was, it's more, you can call it spoken word, you can call it a song, you can call it a rap, so whatever you want to call it. But there is a Canadian by the name of Lillian Allen. And Lillian Allen used to say, no change without struggle. Because we ain't giving up nothing Why do we have to fight for what is our natural right, is what she used to say. And I remember that. It still resonates with me in everything I do, every struggle that I look at. I say to myself, there's no change without struggle. So in other words, you know, I mean, we definitely have to continue to be on the vanguard. We have to continue to keep our ears to the ground. We have to continue to hold institutions feet to the fire, which means we're holding them accountable with consequences where necessary. We have to be resolute. We have to be relentless. So in terms of what is the significance of celebrating Black History Month, I mean, the significance is being eternally vigilant to ensure that Black people are not pushed to the back of the line, that Black people are not, the agenda of dismantling anti-Black racism is not pushed off the agenda. And so I'm going to leave it there for now, and then I can elaborate further as we go into the other questions.
Thank you so much. And you know, similar to Angela's comment about our history not starting with enslavement, the comment offered by oh my goodness, the name escapes me now, Hugh Reynolds, the principal of the Africentric school, was that the contributions of Blacks in North America and elsewhere should be recognized and celebrated throughout the year. And institutions and organizations that look at issues of equity and diversity only in the month of February are a deep concern. And his feeling is that we cannot truly cover the topic in just that short space of time, because the contributions are rich and unique, and they encompass many different spheres. So everything that you have spoken about, the impact on institutions, the impact on policies, the impact on our architecture, building, our work that is being done in the city and in the country, really to advance the interests and values that are uniquely Canadian. So he feels further that we have to move beyond the symbolic gestures and to take action so that African Heritage Month can be seen by everyone as a significant. So it isn't tossed to the side as a temporary thing or a trend, as Faduma was hinting at. The question is, what happens for the other 11 months of the year, he asks. And he firmly believes that in order to create a level playing field, we should do our best to use the anti-oppressive lens to address the needs of those who serve and be intentional in recognizing, naming, and removing systemic oppression in our society. So there is an opportunity presented by Black History Month to bring all of these things to light. And I acknowledge that you mentioned, Gary, Owen Sankara Leach, who has joined the Ancestors on his journey this week, or actually from last week, but we just said farewell to him this week. So we honor and respect and acknowledge his contribution. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. Can you please share with us how anti-Black racism is being addressed within your sectors and the impact that COVID-19 has had on your work that addresses anti-Black racism? Okay, and can we start this time with Rosemarie?
Thank you, Ginelle. So the COVID-19 pandemic, that period was a really, it was a time of reckoning within the construction industry and within our community benefits movement. There was, a really strong reaction from contractors about the nooses that were found on construction sites. The community response was swift. They went through all the stages of grief: shock, denial, like, how could this be in 2020? But then we heard from our participants and those, Black experienced journey persons who have been enduring in the system for, so long, and who told us that, this has been happening since forever. This is nothing new. Sure, it's been exposed because of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, and just the time that we were in. Everybody was paying attention on TV. and so it was exposed. And then so the next phase is, the pain and the anger, the guilt. They took to the streets and they marched and they protested. The community, the first news was at the Michael Garron Hospital, and the community there in Regent Park, had an incredible response that really pulled out, called out those contractors who weren't doing everything that they could to make sure that Black lives were protected on the job site. And then we moved to the next stage, bargaining, reaching out to the industry to see, what actions can we take together to address this and to root out systemic and anti-Black racism within the industry and within their institutions. But now I think that we're kind of in a state of depression. That's the next phase. Why? Well, because while many came out with strong statements about zero tolerance, the contractors did. Some even established their internal DEI committees, and some industry leaders working with the mayor, they worked to create the Declaration for Inclusive Workplaces and Communities. But despite all of that, we fear that none of the structural changes that we wanted to see will be forthcoming anytime soon without a sustained fight. Gary, you talk about the fight. Why do we have to keep fighting, for this? Just Friday, when TCBN asked why there was no community benefits on the new transit projects that they're already starting to build, Metrolinx, who was the pioneer for community benefits in Ontario with the Eglinton Crosstown, signaled that they plan to do community benefits differently. Oh. What does that mean? So will we ever come out of that final stage of grief where we can breathe easy, where we feel assured that the industry has changed for the better? I sure hope so. That's what we're working towards. But we got a lot of work to do. And it's not fair, and it's not going to be possible for the Black community alone to be the ones fighting to change our own circumstances. We need everybody on board. We need our white allies as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And Gary, would you like to chime in on this one?
Yes, I absolutely agree with the last point. Definitely, we need everyone involved. Everyone is responsible. So in the words of a poet, a famous poet named Martin Carter, Martin Carter would say, all are involved, all are consumed. So, in terms of addressing and dismantling and rooting out anti-Black racism, it's everyone's responsibility, not just Black people. It's not a burden that only Black people should shoulder. It's one that the entire society has a responsibility towards eliminating, so that everyone can enjoy the fundamental rights and freedoms that's enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I mean, the Human Rights Code in Ontario, and the Human Rights Code in Ontario, this is the 60th anniversary of the code in June of 2022, will be the 60th anniversary. And the code in itself, the preamble says that, the goal is to advance, promote, and prevent discrimination of all
Gary,
kinds.
Can I ask a question there?
COVID-19 situation laid bare some of the inequities.
Gary, can I interrupt you to just ask a question? the experience that we've had is that regardless of whether it's entrenched in the values, in the written values and expressions of the community, that doesn't seem to be enough to motivate action. People love the words and the declarations and the blackout Tuesdays, things like that happen. But what about real change? And how is that something that you might be able to lead with the human rights work that you do?
I mean, real change definitely means continuously monitoring organizations' performance, continuously checking on the standards, the quality, the delivery. So if an organization states that this is what its commitment is, then the mechanisms to monitor whether they're living up to those commitments is essential.
Yeah.
Recently, in terms of the post-secondary institution, and I'm speaking in terms of post-secondary institutions, the Human Rights Commission wrote to every single college and university in Ontario asking them what they're doing to address systemic anti-Black racism in their institutions. We received responses from many of the presidents and different officials of the universities. And then recently, colleges and universities across the country came up with the Scarborough Charter. And what the Scarborough Charter did is the Scarborough Charter came up with a list of actions that the universities will commence and colleges to dismantle, address, respond to anti-Black racism within their institutions. That is just one institution. As you know, the commission, you may have read in the news, the commission is doing an inquiry into racial profiling and anti-Black racism in policing in Toronto. There's also the Right to Read inquiry that looks at, some of the human rights concerns around how reading is taught in schools and the delivery of education. So, I mean, so when you look at the preamble and bringing it to life, definitely there are instruments that can be used to hold institutions accountable. And some of that includes reviews, inquiries, and other things of that nature, but also working collaboratively with institutions as well, so that the spirit of human rights and the culture of respect for human rights can be, embedded into every aspect of organizations.
I'm gonna, in the interest of time to get to the next question, I'm going to ask Angela to respond, but in reflecting on what you're saying, I am feeling tired of all of the work that we do to study while our situation is not improving in real time. And so, we do, I know that the data is important, so I don't want to pretend that studying it, having proof, having evidence, and so on, but there's so much evidence that this is happening and weighing on our people. Angela, I'll let you take it from there. In answering this question, how does anti-Black racism being addressed? How is it being addressed in the sector you're working in?
So, Ginelle, I'm with you. And I think everybody else is a hastened pace and a strong level of impatience. And just reflecting on Faduma's comment at the beginning around how the window in the white public's zeal to acknowledge anti-Black racism, that window is closing fast, and that folks want to get back to business as usual. And as the so-called freedom convoy that we currently are facing is wanting to go back to quote unquote normal. And normal has never been a place that holds good things for Black people.
Right.
So I think for me, in the healthcare sector specifically, is we have certainly used this moment, a number of us, to wedge ourselves into the planning spaces that are saying they're planning for recovery. Because I think we all need to say that Black people's business and the business of equity for Black folks and the business of equity for racialized populations, because we know that racism is rooted in a similar tree of oppression that is quite intersectional in how it operates. Yeah. So, the impact of racism on me as a Black woman, is not, disentangled. It's very intertwined. So many of us are using this moment in the healthcare system to say, we want to embed action strategies with a Black health plan in recovery. So which means that, for example, when we're about to lift up cancer screening, when, we can lift up the preventive care, is that there must be prioritization for the screening and some strategies that bring prioritized strategies for cancer screening for Black populations. Because we know that because of the other marginalizing factors and the material deprivation factors, is that we often get diagnosed later with a poorer prognosis and with earlier in terms of mortality. So that's one of the pieces that I think we're saying. The other thing that I think many of us are saying, and I would suggest that we all move with, is to not settle for small pockets of grants and pilot initiatives where we get a couple $1 million to placate, quite frankly. And we get to do small initiatives within pockets of our communities that really makes no material change, no structural change, but there can always be the response that, well, Black people did get money. And I'm saying, I'm no longer necessarily comfortable in taking the money. I want to see our agenda embedded in the public policy agenda of governments and of structures. Because until then we will always be a sideshow. And I'm really suggesting that this moment's call for us not to continue to be a sideshow. The other last piece that I'll just end on here, Ginelle, is that I think one of the things that we have seen as well is in leadership, folks say for efficiency purpose, we need to launch strategies in recovery that can respond to the needs of the general population, and that's efficient and effective. And we will do the equity piece after. So that means that even in that planning for recovery is we are always behind, because we are always coming after the broad approach is taken for the quote unquote general population, and the general population is often code for the general white population. So I'm saying that even in labor, as we are building strategies, is the strategy of equity must be in tandem and must move in lockstep with every other strategy. It cannot continue to be an afterthought. And that is the piece that for me really can get at the embedding structurally and the really lifting up structural changes that have longer lasting impact.
Yeah, and some of your comments mirror what was shared by Hugh Reynolds. His basic point was that with things like the Omicron becoming more prominent and COVID, although COVID shows at the same time the importance of a strategy, as you say, that will focus on addressing specific members of the Black community and the impacts of these things. the existence of COVID is being used as, well, that's not really anti-Black racism is no longer a priority. And so he was encouraging some of the same thinking that you spoke about there. And so let's move on to the third question. And it is, please tell us opportunities your organization's work has had to improve access for Black youth and adults in the key sectors of employment, education, and health. And can we start with Gary?
All right, so that's a really big question, but it's one of the most important questions in terms of improving access for Black youth and adults in the key sectors of education, employment, and health. As you know, 2022 in Toronto has started off really, really tragically for many of our young people and their families. In terms of the homicide rate this year in Toronto, the majority of homicides and the persons behind the gun has been young people. So what we've had in our society right now is we've had a situation where our young people, some of our young people are in crisis. Some of our young people are in crisis, and that crisis that our young people are in is one that requires all of our energies and our support. Our young people, in terms of improving access, we have to provide access to another caring adult. Our young people, many of them do not have elders to speak to. When I say elders, I mean people of their own, people who are older than them. So they're left to their own devices. And I know that I speak to a lot of young people, and many times I'm the only person that's above 30 that they speak to, because no one else will give them the time of day to provide advice, to hear their ideas, to provide suggestions, to provide mentoring. An example of it is today, in the middle of the panel, I received a call. You probably may have seen me speaking while on the phone earlier before the formal part of the program, but someone called me and urgently needed to speak. So I said to her, I said, well, I'm on a panel now. Panel is finished at 8:30. You can expect a call from me at 8:30 once the panel is over. Sometimes I feel 5, 6, 7 calls a day. So our young people need places to turn to where they can speak to people. A lot of our young people are also street involved as in homeless, unhoused. And they also have aspirations. They also want to work. They also want to do all the other opportunities that other young people have. One young man I was speaking to a couple of days ago during my nightly bike ride said to me, he says, well, can you help me to find a job? I said, I'm going to look into it, and then I'm going to look for you once I get the information. So when I bike, I will look for that area where that young man sits on the street, and I will provide the information. So our young people, improving access for our young people is providing them with hope and opportunity. I mean, hope, opportunity, and caring adults is an important piece of wraparound support for our young people right now. I mean, our young people, and I say our young people, I didn't shift to adults only because the shooting incident that occurred at David and Mary Thompson this week, and my condolences to the school community, the families, and everyone affected. But that has weighed heavily on me for the past 72 hours or so since I heard about it. It weighs heavily on me, because the thing about it is that how does a 14-year-old get access to a gun rather than a scholarship? How does a 14-year-old get access to a gun rather than a mentoring program? How does he get access to a gun rather than a program that allows him to be a community leader, a student leader, a volunteer in a community-based organization, a coach, being on a soccer team, or being somewhere else? Why that cannot be the standard? That cannot be the type of situation that we want our young people to be in. So we must do more to support them. And I remember that in 2012, when the incident happened in Scarborough at the barbecue in Danzig, I wrote an article called Scarborough, the Scarborough shooting aftermath. It is time to get serious about stopping gun violence. But when I spoke about it, what I did is I provided a list of suggestions in terms of community resources, opportunities for young people, mentoring, access to jobs. I think those are all things that need to be done. And I know the question is your organization, but I decided to pivot from looking at my organization and trying to say that every single organization, every one of us, have a responsibility. And that was the first theme that I seem to be looking at tonight. All are involved, all are consumed. It's everyone's responsibility now to ensure that our young people can feel a sense of hope, can feel a sense of opportunity, can have caring adults that they can rely upon. It doesn't matter what their station in life is, whether they're living in a home, a condo, a group home, a congregate setting, on the streets, in the incarcerated institutions. It doesn't matter where they are. I think it's time that each of us see it as our responsibility to help the next generation to get on its feet, to see hope, and to aspire and to reach their aspirations. Maybe we've done a lot, but we haven't done enough.
Gary, I'm gonna stop you there to give the other speakers a chance to answer the question. And to say that from the point of view of the school principal, Mr. Reynolds, he's saying that as an educator, he's coming out condemning racism and discrimination, and that we really center the lived experiences and cultural identities of students in everything we do at the school. And he recognizes that the students and their families might have had negative experiences in other places. And for this reason, at the school, they aim to provide a welcoming environment. So they also aim to ensure that resources used in the classroom are culturally relevant, and that while incorporating student voice into decision-making, they do this. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected some of the in-person work that they do in the school, and this has forced them to look at professional development of the staff in a different way. They're planning to have individuals from the community visit the schools in order to interact with the staff and student. And because of the pandemic, many of the activities have to be done virtually. So basically saying that the pandemic has affected the impact that they're able to have in the school. I recently had some contact with Dr. Kenneth Hardy's work, talking about rage and trauma that we experience because of these repeated microaggressions and acts of racial violence against our bodies, minds, and souls. So with that, I'll move on and ask Rosemarie if you'll comment on this question.
Thank you, Ginelle, and I really appreciated hearing Gary speak, and just this panel in general, and this, thank you Faduma for organizing this. We need to have more of these really deep and meaningful conversations. Given their long history of struggle for fair wages, workers' rights, and dignity, I think unions have a social and moral responsibility to stand with the community to demand better inclusion of Black, Indigenous, and peoples of color in the workforce that builds public infrastructure. This was the root of the foundation of how the TCBN got started, to be able to create opportunities, because we were looking at the same situation that Gary was talking about, Black youth being killed practically every week on the street, not getting opportunities, you know, not being able to access a job, you know, not doing well in the educational system. How do we make sure that we're creating opportunities? And when our taxpayer dollars are being used like this, you know, how do we figure out a process whereby we can carve out opportunities so that they can have a job, they can have, you know, an entrepreneurship opportunity, they can, you know, create spaces within their communities that, you know, that uplift them, recreation spaces, cultural spaces. How do we make sure that the infrastructure that is being built is welcoming and conducive in supporting the Black lives in our communities? And so while the struggle is real, I gotta say that as a community labor coalition, we've been able to do some good work over these years. While we have developed some tremendous partnerships with several unions and contractor pre-apprenticeship partners, too many at this moment to kind of name them, but there's one union that stood out really strongly over the last year, and that's the Carpenters Union. They registered over 200 of our participants who are now working that wouldn't have an opportunity otherwise. And, you know, they've taken some really outstanding leadership, going into local communities, talking directly with the youth at the corner and handing out flyers with TCBN and just encouraging them to come in and to consider the construction industry as an opportunity for them. We have good outcomes too with the International Brotherhood for Electrical Workers, the UA Local 46, that's the plumbers and steam fitters, LAUNA. And we're building good relationships too with the sheet metal workers, Local 30. Many of our young people probably never thought that they could have had an opportunity in the construction industry to build up infrastructure in their neighborhoods. And by the way, without a college diploma or a university degree, and just a high school education, maybe even grade 10 or grade 12, they can get a good job starting at $20, $25, $26 an hour. And because it's a unionized position, year over year, the salary increases without them ever having to go to their employer and demand an increase of salary. How do we make sure that we're creating these kinds of opportunities for our young people? I gotta say that, you know, it's been a really good partnership with our labor allies in making some of this happen. We just need to see it replicated more broadly and scaled as a good and viable solutions. And it's not just construction, trade jobs, you know, where you're working, you know, on the ground with your hands. It's the design and architects and engineers and lawyers, you know, and administrative professionals. It's not just construction work, so let's not get that twisted either in our thinking about what the opportunities could be.
Okay, Angela, thank you. Thank you very much, Rosemarie. Angela, I'm going to go to you, and we ran out of time in that question, but you know what? I was so engrossed with the conversation. So, but please, you know, provide. It's a big question. So go ahead.
So I'll just kind of maybe just comment on three things. So one piece for me, I see my sister Dina Ladd in the room, and I think about good jobs, and I think about good pay, because, and this picks up on Rosemarie's comment, because I think sometimes we build mentorship initiatives and mentorship programs, and we pay the low minimum wage we have, which is not, clearly it's not sufficient for the basic needs that many of the young people who come from our communities need to cover. So because I think we need to recognize that for many of the young people we're talking about, is that the employment and the income that they earn is income that supplements things that parents aren't able to bring into the household basket. Yeah, so it's not just lunch money or treat money, it's basic needs money. So therefore, I think good jobs is an issue, and I think that is why we need to continue to lean in about the increase to the minimum wage. Yeah, so that's one piece for me. The other, I think, piece that I think is important is that we all use the opportunities we have where we have them to enable young Black people getting employment in the places where we work. So if it's one or two is more than zero. So, somebody may say, well, I may only be able to get 2, or there isn't a lot. And I'm saying, as they say in Jamaica, where I'm from, one cocoa full basket. So, many things can fill that basket. And then lastly, something that has been a desire of mine, and I keep planting the seed wherever I go and hope that a number of people may join me in this. But I really feel that, and this is picking up on Gary's commentary about the violence that many in our communities are caught in, that web that is linked to gang, it's linked to sometimes, in terms of illicit trade. And I think about those young people are young people who have tremendous skills. Those are young people who have tremendous expertise. And we need to change the frame of how we engage this group of young people, to value the assets that they bring to the current trades they're involved in. And therefore, how do we use that to talk about creating almost a little bit of an MBA program for our young entrepreneur in the underground system? Because in the system that many of these young folks are in, you need negotiation skills. They have honed that. You need quality control. They have honed that. They need marketing. They have honed that. There is competition management. Now, very problematic, but they understand the concept. And that there is an understanding about quote unquote market conditions. So I think that there are ways in which we can translate some of the present dynamics and some of the problematic spaces where many of the young folks who we are particularly concerned about are, and we can shift that and build on the skills that this group of young folks have and transform that into something different, and not to just come at it as these are bad young people who need to be reformed. And yes, in terms of clearly we want to change, we want change, but I think we need to use an engagement language that gets at valuing the assets that this group of young folks have and how to transform that.
Absolutely, thank you so much. I'm reminded of Dr. Paul Hill from Cleveland, Ohio, says that when talking about young people, that we don't have a young people problem, we have an adult problem. We need to address it from the perspective of what we are doing, because children really were not born with violence on their agenda. Okay, so we're turning to the last question for our panelists this evening. And this question is, what do you feel are some ways we can continue to be effective activists in ending anti-Black racism? And so can we start with Rosemarie?
Yes, I would say self-care, being gentle with ourselves as activists. We work really hard, we fight really hard, and sometimes we have some wins, and sometimes we have some losses. And sometimes we have some setbacks, but don't take that to heart. Just keep looking at your future goals and really working together and being gentle with each other as community activists so that we can, gain the strength to keep on fighting. TCBN, we are very, very clear that we need to celebrate our wins as community. And so every time there is a major milestone, we want to celebrate that. And we want to celebrate the achievements that we've made for community benefits, those contractors who are leading, those unions who are leading, those community benefits champions out there. We want to recognize them. That's why we did our Building Diversity Awards. And that is coming up real soon. You'll hear more about it, but nominate yourselves, nominate each other, and get your achievements recognized as you're making waves, in our society.
Thank you. And Hugh Reynolds, it talks about us really taking time to recognize our accomplishments and to celebrate as a way to really remind ourselves of our brilliance and our power. So I wanted to share that with you. Can I ask Skerritt to comment next?
Yep, definitely. So in terms of the question of how we continue to be effective activists, definitely having support circles and networks of support. But those networks of support that we have are networks of support that are varied. So I may have a network of support of people who are activists, but I will also have a network of support with people who I can have leisure. I can go out and walk. I can go biking. I can do things that are pleasure, self-care, self-love, all of those things. So sometimes the term Black joy is used, and Black joy is used as Black people finding a way to find leisure so that we're not only in the struggle, but we're also rejuvenating, replenishing, we're resetting, we're doing all the things that are necessary to maintain good and a balanced mental health. Because mental health, a lot of people, a lot of us, I noticed in the chat, one of the members or participants mentioned the high burnout rate. Another participant mentioned that we get tired, right? So how do we foster spaces where we can do activist work, or I call it do battle, but we can still have energy? We can still have energy at the end of the day to do other things, whether it's with our families, our friends, and so forth. I mean, in terms of myself, I deal with serious work, serious activist work, but serious work around human rights and anti-Black racism and the whole set of things. But what I also do is I make time for I have strict time for myself. So I don't do takeouts. I actually cook.
Right.
I actually cook. So, and that is like an interesting way of finding joy. It's when you can go into a kitchen and you can start chopping off vegetables and you can start doing all that stuff and see the end result at the end of the day, at the end of it in 20, 30 minutes, and you can enjoy it. That for myself, in terms of feeding my mind and my body, is also one of the ways that I find myself being effective. Because when I eat well, my energy level is good, my mood is good, and everything else. So I think in terms of effective activists means taking care of the self, the mind, the body, and every other need that you have, so that when you go out there, your energy is visible.
Yeah, I thank you for that. I was having a conversation the other day about spiritual warfare that is ongoing against our people. So I think I would add to that the spiritual piece, because I think that it is a broken spirit that allows you as the 13 or 14-year-old to hold a gun to someone else's head and shoot them, one of your classmates. You know, that's the sign of a broken spirit. So I think we are in the midst of ongoing, relentless spiritual warfare against our people. And I'm not talking spiritual in terms of necessarily the God consciousness and so on, but that part of us that taps into our connection to our brilliance, to each other, to our power, is under attack constantly because of the dehumanization. So thank you for mentioning balancing, resetting, and you said actually before cooking, as if that is, I consider cooking the norm and eating out to be kind of an odd thing, because, you know, it's just the way we grew up. But in any case, you did say actually, because I think we have kind of flipped the script and we eat out a lot. So you're actually cooking your own food. That's amazing. Angela.
So I think about self-care, and I think about the Audre Lorde quote that talks about self-care for Black women being a revolutionary act. And that us caring for ourselves as Black people is part of the resistance, because we certainly cannot push the tide back of white supremacy without being in some place of good health and some good and stable connections with each other. The other thing that I think about as well, and this is picking up on Gary's comment about networks, is some of us may be in workplaces where we are just the small few, where you may be the only one, and therefore the value and the importance of finding community. And it may not be a community organization, but it may be a community of 3 people. It may just be finding the company of others where we can bring both our grief and our joy and our anger. Because one of the things that I think lives with us is anger. And it's anger in response to racism. It's not just because Black people are angry. It's because we are angry at the condition that the structures have built around us and seek to continue to encase us in. And then I think lastly for me is I always think about our joy, and the level of our joy is also the level of our resistance. So, folks are around, and I forget where I was, and people are saying, but you're laughing like it's the most. The condition that we're in is not the best, but why are you laughing? And there isn't an appreciation for the fact that Black joy and is resistance. And it is also a way in which we hold on to our humanity under some very inhumane condition. So for me, it's always asking us to find those places that keeps us human, because many things around us would seek for us not to be, and then to use that to justify doing to us what they seek to do to us. So yeah, so I would just leave with that. Yeah.
And that is such a beautiful, excellent note to end our conversation on. I just want to say thank you to the panelists for being generous with your wisdom and your thoughts, and providing inspiration to all of us with all that you've shared this evening. And so many really good quotes, but Black joy is our resistance and the way that we hold on to our humanity. Let's take that with us as we go. So thank you so much, everyone.